Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. The Invisible Wheelchair Podcast was selected by FeedSpot as one of the top 10 obsessive-compulsive disorder podcasts on the web. I'm Donald Grodoff, EFT tapping practitioner and OCD coach at FamilyOCD.com. On the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, I focus on the hidden world of OCD and anxiety with interviews and information around this topic. My purpose is to bring about awareness of OCD, those who treat OCD, and of course, those who suffer with OCD. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a treatable and manageable disorder. In my practice at FamilyOCD.com, I guide people through the process of ERP therapy and other alternative treatments. If you know of someone suffering with OCD, I can help. Simply visit FamilyOCD.com. If you or someone you know suffers or has suffered and recovered from OCD and would like to get their story out, simply contact us through www.invisiblewheelchair.com. We want to talk to you and get your story out on the podcast. Know that the ideas and thoughts presented here are not necessarily those of Family OCD, Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, or Donald Grodoff. We also ask you to take just a few moments and leave comments at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Those comments help us to know what the next topic should be, and we really want to hear from you. Now, let's get to that podcast. Bert Freeman is the founder of Talk Associates, and he has provided staff development programs for educators and positive direction programs for parents since 1987. He is the author of Taking Charge of Your Positive Direction in 2006, Your Positive Direction Now in 2010, and the Positive Direction ESP Manual for Educators, ESP being the Everybody on the Same Page with Excellence on the Same Page. In his work, he is joined by a team of educators and experts who are skilled at assisting schools, districts, and parents to accelerate student achievement. Historically, he has assisted schools with programs that are compatible with local and national school improvement processes and provided the positive direction skills and frameworks for comprehensive school improvement and instructional leadership. Since the beginning of this work, Bert and Talk Associates make every assurance that consistent positive direction is compatible. It continues to stand the test of time for educators and parents. Bert has a BS in engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy and an MS in human relations from Golden Gate University. He is also an Olympian and a U.S. national fencing champion. And now, let's go to that interview. Well, Bert, thank you so much for being part of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm really glad to have you on here. You and I have known each other for a long time, and it's a real pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and now to be able to get you on my podcast means a lot to me. So thank you for being here and welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, Bert, what I like to do when I do these interviews is to ask my guest if they could share some type of, maybe a little more of a personal story so my audience can get a good sense of you. And because I know you really well, I know you and you're a neat person. I want them to know that too. So if maybe there's a story that you could tell us that kind of gives us a little flavor of you.
Back when I was younger, a lot younger than I am now.
We won't go to age here.
That's right. But I lived in Philadelphia, in Germantown, which is a part of Philadelphia. And we lived on a city street, and we lived in the city. I had a brother and a foster sister and our parents. And I remember our next door neighbor was an older woman. I refer to her as the old lady, but that's in more in terms of affection more than anything else. We lived in a duplex, and there was a wooden rail between these two houses in this duplex. And often, at some point in my life and in my teenage years, she would always. It was almost like she took me under her wing, and she would talk to me about different things. And I felt, and there was this flow of wisdom that was coming to me. Now, whether I grasped it, I'm still wondering about that.
Yeah.
But there was this flow of wisdom that came, and she would tell me stories about different things. It was like it was like sitting at the foot of the guru, so to speak. And that was the experience I had with her for a number of years in my teenage years, probably from the age of 15 to 18. It's different than it was anything planned. It just that, when we just so happened to be there, then she would just talk to me and say things to me that really helped me from a standpoint of understanding a little bit more about myself, but also understanding about ways to approach people.
Would you say that that led you or was part of the reason that led you to where you are now and dealing with and we're going to talk about the positive direction, but do you feel like that played a big role in that?
I had yet to think about it that way, but in a way it did, because she shared some things with me that were sometimes pretty intense, but she shared them in a way that would her encouragement was to uh, almost like embrace where life is and what it's all about, and at the same time being able to navigate successfully on a day-to-day basis, and however people are, and how it was much more important for me to focus on my internal character rather than to evaluate everybody else's character.
Wow, that sounds very powerful. That's amazing. Like I said, and I don't believe that it was some kind of luck or coincidence. I think it was
Mhm.
a purposeful, I'm going to say attraction, not to make it sound weird, but there
Mhm.
was a purposeful attraction there to bring you to that person that, because it shaped you, and it's, at least it sounds to me, and from what I know of you, I think it shaped you into a really a neat person, so that's really cool.
Can I write that down?
Yeah, you can write that down. You can just pay me some royalties and it's okay. So let's talk about your thing is positive direction, which
Mhm.
about a month ago, I did a podcast talking about it from what I know about it. But now we got the master of it here that I want to be able to talk about. Kind of first of all, I guess define it a little bit as far as what it is and what it's about, and then we can talk about maybe a little bit more about what it does and all that. But if you could define it, what do you mean by positive direction and how does it work?
A lot of times, the very first impression people have when I say I talk about positive direction or I do positive direction are phrases like, "Well, that means that the glass is half full." And I tell people that if you want a full glass, then the positive direction is half full, because they talk about half full. But if you want an empty glass, then the positive direction is half empty. And if I'm backing out of my driveway, then for me, the positive direction is reverse. So when we talk about direction, we're talking about the direction of the successes that you want, the outcomes that you want, the results that you want, or you need, all in a way that you're focused in the direction that you want to or need to move toward rather than what you want to get away from. These skills are called consistent positive direction. And these skills are about being able to do that all the time. It's got a lot less to do with being nice. It's got a lot less to do with being cool. It's just, if you just think about it from a standpoint of direction, what is the direction that I want to move towards or have to move towards? It's different than just want sometimes. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary, whether I want to or otherwise.
Now, a question for you that brings one up in my mind because
Hmm.
when I present it to a client, I always talk about the fact that it doesn't always, at least in when I see it, each step doesn't always in itself look what we would call positive. You know,
Right.
when I talk about with my clients, I'm dealing a lot of times with somebody that comes in and they are very have a lot of anger, let's put it that way, you
Hmm.
know. And
Hmm.
so the example I always get is that if you're maybe lividly angry, you know, the next step might be just anger. Instead of lividly anger, you're just angry,
Hmm. Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know. And but if you look down on that step, you wouldn't necessarily call that positive, you know. Nobody looks at anger and goes, well, that's positive, you know. But
Hmm.
it's I always say it's heading towards the direction. Is that, would you say that's
Yeah, that's really powerful. If ever, a lot of times, we're often in situations that I'm probably the first thought in our mind is, I need to get out of this. I need, I need to do, I need to get out of this, and I need to do something else. And that's the whole point. Part of the point is that if I'm someplace different than I want to be or need to be, then I work to get to someplace else. A lot of times I might work to get out of that. If I just take another minute, it might be a good idea of me to take another minute and say, well, what do I want to get into, rather than what do I want to get out of.
in other words, just don't jump out at anything, just, you know.
Well, that's true too. That's true. That's right. That's a very good point. So this has a lot to do with moving forward and improving forward. It sounds academic, but it's more than just academic. It's something that I can do every minute of every day. Just know what I'm going towards, or deal with what I'm going towards. And at the same time, maintain my composure as well.
It's a lot of wording, correct?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the core of it. The very core of it is taking all of the negative words out of everything that you say, pretty close to 100%. All the don'ts, won'ts, can'ts, wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't, sad, worry, difficult, dumb, stupid, ridiculous, probably. All the dictionary definitions, take everything out and still say what needs to be said. Being able to get into using that language from a standpoint, it's a language rather than, then that also is what contributes to me staying focused forward. And and the reason I say it contributes because it's different than the don't, those don'ts and everything are emotional kinds of things that I need to, cut out. But it's got a lot more to do with direction. However I feel, I can feel very strongly about something, and while I feel very strongly about something, I can allow myself or position myself to know this is what I want to move towards because of the situation that I'm in, rather than this is what I want to move away from because of the situation that I'm in. So it's got a lot to do with forward movement.
The question I have, I guess, is, you know, is it getting the messages out of the mind first, or is it the words coming out first? In other
So
words, are we
that's
talking
a,
about, you know, dealing with the mindset of the negative messages, or are we talking about the verbalization of them? Which it's a chicken or egg story, I think, in a
that's a
way, but which comes
good
first
question.
for, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. It's the verbalization.
Okay.
I hope I did say that right.
No, that's no, that sounds right.
And the reason is the verbalization is that there's a lot of stuff that's going to go on in my head, and it's true. It's probably there's a lot that I'm going to manage, and there's a lot that comes up whether I wanted to or otherwise. And yet at the same time, when I want to express myself, I can still express myself, and this has a lot less to do with changing necessarily the emotion. And a lot of times people think that this has a lot to do with changing the emotion. It just basically says that there's a language that takes me moves me forward, even when all of these emotions are going on. And when that language becomes automatic, it makes it that much easier. I always liken it to people, people who work. I ask people at your work, there's certain language that you have to speak on the job. They're on the job language. And so there's certain words that you use all the time. Acronyms, for example, I might say something like the ATC or something like that. And ATC is an acronym that everybody uses on the job. And we use it so much, it's like a word. You know what I mean? And basically, so when you're changing this language, when you take all the negative words out of everything that you say, you can still say what needs to be said. And it's just like you've changed the language. And it just so happens that that language contributes to the direction that you want to move towards.
How do you do it? Like, give me an example, if you would, of like if somebody's coming to you wanting to learn this positive direction, what are the steps, or how does it work?
The first step is dealing with the language, helping people to understand, to take all the don'ts. I say don'ts, won'ts, can'ts, wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't, sad, worried, difficult, all the dictionary definition out of everything that you say, and still say what needs to be said. Part of that is helping folks understand, when you say it out loud, do it that way. So if I might say something like, I don't want to go outside right now. And because that word don't is in there, that's my indication to change the sentence. Different than necessarily to change the sentence. And so if I change the sentence, I'm going to say, well, I want to stay inside right now. And it's different than I'm going to necessarily change the idea, change the feeling. I mean, I might still have the same feeling, but I would express the feeling as to what I want to move towards. I need to stay inside, want to stay inside. Sometimes it's a need to, and sometimes it's a want to. And they're both relevant.
As you went through the don'ts, can'ts, you spewed out like a list of words there.
Yes.
It kind of reminded me of like something George Carlin would do, his list of this. I don't know if you ever heard like his list of the seven, the 7 30th words. You could almost come up with the 7 most negative word, or and he used to like boom, 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 like that. So anyway, that little sidetrack there, but so how did you come to this process? Where did it come from? Was this your concept, or how did it develop?
It may have been my concept. Anyway, it was personal then, rather than from an emotional standpoint. It was just one day. It was back in 2007 or something like that. And I was in the middle of a conversation, and for whatever reason, having a conversation with a group of folks, and every now and then, everybody has a piece in their lives where this piece of profound stuff comes out. I'm sure Don grew up has
it's a rarity. It's a rarity, but
well, that's the best part about it, is that it's a rarity.
Yeah.
But anyway, that time in 2006, 2007. I said, well, man, you can take all the negative words out of everything that you say. Everybody can do that. And we were talking about being positive, or whatever it was at the time. And that's where it all started. And then for me personally, I started doing that back then, and doing it more and more to a point, it became a journey. It was like a personal directive. And then at one point, just decided to do it and share it with friends and relatives, and people who I was close to, anybody who would want to hear. And then the last thing in the world I want to say became an obsession. It was close.
Okay.
But I realized that it was going to be a habit. It's going to be a habit, and so I heard myself talking one time, and I said, man, I use a lot of negative words, and calling myself a positive person, and then realizing that if I'm going to do this, I need to do it completely, and that's what happened. So in 2007, actually made, for me personally, I made up my mind to take all the negative words out of pretty close to everything that I said. There's some guidelines around it where you have to. If you're quoting somebody, you always quote people for what they said rather than trying to translate that into a positive direction. So that's one of the guidelines. However, for the most part, aside from that, you take all the dictionary definition, negative words out of everything that you say.
How long did it take you to get there? And are you, well, let me, I guess the first question is, are you there? But how long did it take to really get that process down?
It took about a year, maybe a little over a year, to a point where it actually became a habit. And ever since then it has been a habit. And it's a habit in my writing. The only way that anybody would know that is if I told them no. So this is different than going around telling people, hey, I'm Bert Freeman and I use positive direction, and you're going to hear it all the time. No, the most important part is you just talk, you just use it, rather
Yeah.
than telling people that you're using it, you just use it.
So you teach kind of by example, in other words.
No, necessarily no. No, because I would love to say that, but teaching by example is if I told them, well, I'm going to teach you.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just use it in regular conversation. If it comes up that I use these skills, then if somebody's really interested, then I would show them how to do it. And show them how to use the skills consistently. And it takes longer than a day. It takes longer than a day. It takes a pretty good week, because you really have to make up your mind that you're going to do it. And this is one thing that I really learned from these skills in terms of dealing with other people and teaching these skills, is that whoever I am, whenever I really want to do something, I have to make up my mind. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer than a minute.
Yeah, especially when your mind is like cement, like mine. It's just hard to get into sometimes. But
I know, but you're in such, I mean, what you do is just so fascinating, but you made up your mind to do it.
yeah, yeah,
And you have rules and you have guidelines and you have those things. And the really neat part about it is you have boundaries. And I have boundaries. We have boundaries. When we make up a mind that we're going to do something, the boundaries are there. And because of the intent to do that, that I will almost always stay within the boundaries.
I do want to mention the books that you have, and what got you started in writing books? What made you decide to put it down in writing?
Encouragement from friends and from other people. In fact, the first book I wrote, I used to write things anyway, little booklets and stuff like that. The first main book I wrote was called Taking Charge of Your Positive Direction. That was back in 2007. That pretty much encompassed all of this work around consistent positive direction. And there's been some refinements since then. I've read, and then the other book I wrote was a stronger refinement of the first three chapters of the first book, and that's called Your Positive Direction Now. So that's those two books are the two books that I have.
Well, Bert, it feels like I've just gotten you kind of revved up now, but I don't like to go too long with I usually try to keep my podcasts in a certain, like, 20 to 30-minute time frame. So,
Okay.
because I know from the fact that you could talk about this all day, and I could too, because I think it's great stuff. You do some neat work, and I really appreciate you sharing all that you've done here. What I'd like to ask you now is to share how people might be able to find out more about you, give the information about how they can find you and get more information.
Okay. Well, first of all, the titles of the books are Your Taking Charge of Your Positive Direction, And then the other one is Your Positive Direction Now. And I have a podcast, and that's my podcast is Bert Freeman dot podbean.com. And I've right so far I have 22 episodes of my podcast, and they're all around, and it's called Your Positive Direction Now.
Okay.
So those are my books, and I also teach a course called how to Positive Direction ESP. I apologize, my head was going.
That's okay. It's okay.
And ESP stands for getting everybody on the same page with excellence on the same page. And
a website? Do you have a website too, right?
Yeah, my website is www.positivedirection.net.
Okay. And I'll remind my audience, I will have this up on the invisiblewheelchair.com site. So, well, Bert, like I said, it's always a joy to talk to you. And I so much appreciate you being on today and talking about this stuff, because I think it's great stuff and can do wonders for people.
Well, thanks, Don. And by the way, I always enjoy my Don Rudolph conversations anyway. That's the truth.
This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email Don at invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.